Hi, folks. It's Brent Bozell. I've got a special guest today, someone I've known for a good number of years. He is a man, I could go through his resume. I don't want to. I'd rather say this about Adam Brandon personally. There are a lot of people in Washington, D.C. who like to call themselves conservative leaders. I hate that phrase because anyone who bestows leadership on himself normally is not. But there are leaders, and Adam is one of them. Adam is one of the most principled people I know in this city, which I know is saying very little, but he is. And he's a man whose organization, FreedomWorks, is most associated with fiscal sanity and a limited government and returning to the states the rights and the powers that ought to be theirs. But Adam is more than that, and it does a disservice to simply limit him there. Adam is a believer in the American dream. He's written a book about restoring the American dream. So he's a special guest today. So I want to open it this way. What the hell happened last week?
Wow. Well, some of it in retrospect was completely predictable. I think if you go back for the last year, one of the things I've been trying to say is like Republicans have to run on something. And not necessarily just platitudes, because Kevin McCarthy did have his commitment, but it was just a bunch of stuff. Like every kid should have access to great schools. Like, oh, okay, all right. Gas prices should be lower. Okay, but what were the specific items that you were going to do? And that's what I thought was missing. So you had an issueless campaign kind of going on right there. And Mitch McConnell came out over a year ago and said, we're not going to run on issues. Okay, well, we weren't running issues in the House, you weren't running issues in the Senate, and you just hoped that it was the unpopularity of Biden and his plan, and that's what got you through. And that old say, you can't beat something with nothing. So then the second thing that we have to start looking at, and this is a hard thing for GOP, we have to reassess some things, mechanics. The mechanics of winning elections. Our side's getting a little outdated here. I am one. I think we should have a national holiday for elections, and I think we should all go and have a barbecue and vote on election day and show your ID, but that's maybe my fantasy world. The majority of Americans are now going to be voting early. They're going to be voting by mail, and clearly the other side has mastered that technique, and we have not. And until we start getting our act together there, we're going to keep losing elections. So you have to win on your issues and your principles, and then you also have to win on mechanics. And those are two things that we didn't do this cycle.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was asked for prognostications, as everybody's asked. This year, I took the position that I was not making any predictions, and I deferred to others. I passed the buck. Now, I didn't predict what happened, but I wasn't buying this landslide. I never was. And there were a number of different reasons for it. One, the polling data never showed it. People were looking at races in New York, and it went from an impossibility to a long shot, and that somehow became a red wave. And they were looking at that in various other states. So A, I didn't see the polling data. B, the messaging. The American Committee. I was very disappointed in this American Committee. What a pile of malarkey. It was just the same old talking points, the same promises they made that they've never enacted. These are policies. You could read half of them, and the Biden administration could say, we support it too. Who's for inflation? Thirdly, talking about the Biden excesses, but they never offered the alternative. You know why? Because so oftentimes they didn't have an alternative. Inflation is a great one. Inflation, bad, caused by spending. Guess what? The Republicans are voting for spending. They just didn't vote for the last Uber spending bill. But the ongoing spending is out of control, and they're supporting it.
So if you look at the data right now, and we're going to have weeks more of this to pour in, but one thing is clear. If you look at the top aggregate numbers, so many groups tended to be more conservative. Black Americans moved. Hispanic Americans moved. College-educated white women even moved more Republican, more conservative. So you look at that data and be like, oh, where's this landslide? It should be here. The problem is they moved in red districts. They didn't move where they needed to move. And that's where you have to start asking these questions. Really, these elections are coming down to maybe 30 districts right now. And how are you competing in those districts?
there was another issue.
Mhm.
You touched on it, early voting.
Mhm.
People were going on and on. Look at Pennsylvania about the Fetterman-Oz race. And it was closing, and yet all the polls showed Fetterman always winning this race. This was another one that made me wonder, where's this way? If it was away, Oz would have been ahead by 25 points by now. But to finish the thought on here, so you then saw Fetterman in that horrific debate performance. So everybody said, okay, what you're running against, Oz, is a incapacitated, putting it nicely, Marxist. If you can't beat somebody who is mentally unfit to be in office right now, mentally, and is a Marxist to boot, how can you not win? Well, guess what? That disastrous performance was at the last hour. How many Pennsylvanians had already voted? So it made no difference. All these last moves, I thought, okay, I poll you and I ask you who you support. You support X. Doesn't mean you didn't vote for Y, and now you regret it, and now you support
Brett,
this.
you're bringing up that bit. We still often think of election day as the date that you circle on the calendar. When the election day may actually not be November 7 or November 10, that election day may actually be October 15 or October 10 that most of these ballots and votes are in. And so that's the basic mechanics. And actually, I was at a dinner, you were there too, and I know it's off the record, but one thing I thought was very interesting is our speaker that night told us that, that Fetterman, the number one issue of his voter, number one issue, crime and safety.
Yes.
Oh my, how do you lose that race when your opponent's number one issue is crime and safety, and as you say, is basically an incapacitated Marxist? But we did. And there's got to be lessons to learn there. I mean, here's some good news from the election. Ohio has become a solidly conservative state. Florida, I give DeSantis a lot of credit, has really moved that state. So we know in the next couple of years, the next election is going to be settled in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona. Those are your three states.
And there are cracks in New York. Nothing big has happened yet, but there are cracks. Flipping a district here or there, but there's movement. I mean, New York is collapsing.
Right.
So it's either leave or maybe vote Republican. But here, there's an old adage, Adam, which is that Republicans win when they distinguish themselves from Democrats. Republicans lose when they don't. Now, you can go back to the days of Richard Nixon. And it's scientific fact that when you present yourself as being other than your opponent, and you have a message and a commitment, and people buy it, then you win. Ronald Reagan, Bush, when he ran as a conservative. Bush 92 or Bush 41 was losing until the very end. He turned and he said, I'm the conservative, they're the liberals, and this is no more taxes, read my lips, all that. He won his campaign. Dole in 96 was marshmallow. He lost. Trump in 2016.
That was pretty clear colors there.
A little different there. He won. That's how you win elections. If you ask the average guy there, folks, you're not the average people. The average people aren't doing what you're doing, which is taking the interest, that you're taking out here with us. If you ask the average person who's not actively involved politically, if you ask them, they will tell you, Republican, Democrat, it's all noise. It's all noise. And that's the Republicans' fault. What Kevin McCarthy should have done is why did Newt Gingrich win two amazing landslides in 1994, capturing both the House and the Senate? They came forward with a contract with America that said, here are 10 issues. In 100 days, we'll pass them, or we'll vote on them. We'll vote. Here it is, American people. If you want these things done, and they were all 70% issues, they were all landslide issues, and he won massive victory. The Republicans were either one of two things, Adam. I'll let you comment on it. Were they that stupid or that cynical as to not do that?
Cynical, that's a dangerous word, because once you become cynical, that's where I've noticed someone who comes to this town with the best of intentions, that's where you lose them. But I was actually more thinking in these terms of everything comes back to football for me. And there's a saying that coaches warn players, don't read your press clippings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of Republicans were reading and being like, man, we're going to win this. We're going to win this. And what do? They start playing it safe. And in football, there's something called the prevent defense, which is we're going to stand back here. We're going to let you get 8 yards, but we're not going to let you score a touchdown. But the problem is you get 8 yards, 6 yards, 5 yards, 10 yards, 8 yards. Next thing you know, you do score that touchdown. You do run the clock out. And actually, the greatest thing that happened to Republicans was the election date came because they were leaking oil all the way to the end because they never, when you didn't get out front and start standing for something, that person who you could ask them in polling, do you like, what's your main issue? My main issue is inflation. Do you like the Biden agenda? No, I don't. That should have been a Republican voter. But if you don't see that contrast, I'll just go stay with the status quo.
And to picking up on what you said before, where we distinguish parties and needing to learn modern elections, I believe Obama fundamentally rewrote politics in 2008. He had a fringe element of the American people supporting his radical agenda. But they had a calculation. If our minority vote, not color, but size, if our minority vote is mobilized enough, we can beat your dormant majority vote. And they did it in 2008. They did it again in 2012. Interestingly enough, I think they repeated themselves this year. Because if you look at the polling, what do the American people think about what's going on in Washington about Biden's policies? They're horrified them. But he does have a base, and he does have a very strong base. And they went out, no apologies for what they were doing. Biden doubled down. He said, I'm not changing a thing. Right. I mean, they're arrogant. Why? Because they know they've got enough of a radical base that they will come out and vote. And then they push the old behemoth, the Trump, the MAGA Trumps. And I think that ended up helping them.
So I look at, I was telling you this earlier, I've been writing on this a little bit. I look at Britain. There's a lot you can learn from Britain. You had Margaret Thatcher before you had Ronald Reagan. Tony Blair created the third way in his parliament before you had Bill Clinton. Then you had Nigel Farage and Brexit before you had the MAGA victory. So they were kind of moving close together here. But what just happened with Liz Truss as prime minister for 45 days? The problem that she ran into was there was no real point to her majority. They had a majority, but that there wasn't really a plan to do it. So she did, I'll give her credit, she did come out with some bold things that she wanted to do, but it was not done she didn't kind of unify her party behind them. This is what we stand for, and they hung her out to dry. So the new prime minister is Mr. Milquetoast, basically. He's not ruffling the waters and doing really much of anything. But what is that going to happen? The next time there's going to be British parliamentary elections, I bet you Labour wins. So that should be a lesson for what. So if you're Kevin McCarthy or you're Republican leadership, are you just going to kind of let this thing fade out? Are you going to go out with a bang? Or are you going to start? Your only chance to fight or to win and coming up in 2024 is if you start drawing these very clear distinctions.
If he wins with a 3-seat majority, whatever it might be, does he survive?
Does he survive the Congress, or does he survive
2 years?
2 years. So this is something that I think is that I really appreciate the Freedom Caucus getting behind right now. And if you go to CNN, it'll be Freedom Caucus holding Kevin McCarthy hostage. Well, what are they asking for? This is this crazy thing. They want 72 hours to review a bill before it gets voted on. 72 hours for a legislator to do their frickin' job, okay? 72 hours for that. They want to also keep with that old sword of Damocles, the motion to vacate, meaning like, look, if McCarthy fails and we could get enough in this body to vote against you, we could take you out. That's an insurance policy. That's all that is. Kevin McCarthy, if you do your job, there's no need to activate that. But the common sense reforms that they are pushing are so, I think if you actually went to the American people, they'd be shocked to wait. Congress isn't given 72 hours to read a bill before they vote. So in a strange way, it's being constructed that the Freedom Caucus is going to be the demise of Kevin McCarthy. The Freedom Caucus could make Kevin McCarthy. The Freedom Caucus could show the way for Kevin McCarthy. And all the members I've talked to are a member of the Freedom Caucus. No one is wishing failure on McCarthy. They're like, look, let's do real legislation. In that 72 hours, part of that, allow us to offer up some amendments so that when we pass bills, it will reflect our conference, which is everything we're getting at.
I don't understand, and tell me if I'm wrong here. I don't understand why when the Republicans held the White House, the House, and the Senate, they couldn't pass a law that would say you've got a week. You know, you're talking about some pieces of legislation that are thousands of pages long with bullet items of $1 billion expenditures. And it takes literally, how many weeks did we go through before people fully understood Obamacare?
Right.
You know, wait a minute, the Department of Health Insurance, she's got dictatorial powers here. How many people took it? So why couldn't they just pass that legislation?
Unfortunately, this is the swamp right here. Because under this system, at midnight, the United States is going to run out of money and go bankrupt unless you settle the debt ceiling. So at 11:55, we're going to put this bill in front of you, and we're going to lard it up with all kinds of crap. Well, that just emasculates your membership. Like there's no strength whatsoever going into that negotiation. And who is that negotiation? It'll be the White House, Joe Biden. It would be Kevin McCarthy as your speaker, probably the minority leader, and then you have your House. So it's like 5-6 people in the room. That's it. This country was not designed to work as a legislative body with 5 or 6 people cutting the deal. So if you stretch it out a little bit, it gets to be a messier process. But this is Mr. Smith Goes to Washington 101. Stretch that process out so that you actually have bills that you debate. And I am fine losing on positions. I just want to be able to give them the chance to actually advocate for my position. So give me a chance to give Mike Lee, give Chip Roy chances to amend pieces of legislation rather than just put a legislative gun to their head saying, pass this or not.
How many times have you seen the Mike Lees and the Ted Cruz's fighting from the standpoint of trying to undo a done deal about which they had no participation?
Right.
Okay, final question.
Yeah.
Mitch McConnell is leader of the Senate. Republicans are in the minority. McCarthy is leader of the House. Republicans have a majority of 2 or 3. Donald Trump announces for president. What's your message to conservatives? Besides buy drugs cheap.
You know, on election day, I was playing that song, "Ooh, child, things are gonna get easier." I was playing that in the office. I always am reminded of this. In these really hard times, that's when leadership gets formed. That's when you actually go through transformation. And I look at every challenge I've had in my life. You either become a worse person or a better person when you go through a real personal challenge. And so this is our opportunity as a movement, our opportunity as a country. It's good. We're going to go through some pains here. But I think at the end of this, we're going to figure out who is the leader of the conservative. We're going to figure out what the conservative movement is. We're also going to find out what this Republican Party is, which if you were asking me and tying me up to electrodes right now, I couldn't tell you what the Republican Party is.
I think that conservatives are going to leave the party. I think the party is going to suffer some grave consequences of that. I think the Republican Party could be doomed to go into oblivion, which parties go into oblivion. But I also believe the whole damn thing can be turned around in a very positive way if they simply allow conservatives to lead. That's where America is. Right. And you and I have looked at the polling data. I will tell our friends that we've looked at polling data. That one poll that we took that looked at the top, we looked at 40 issues to see if the public agreed with us on 70% or more on any of the issues. We found 13 issues where the American people were on our side by 70% or more, another 12 where they were with us 80% or more. So America's on our side. Right. The problem is the Republican Party. The problem, I believe, is also a conservative movement in Washington that needs to visit America. Remember, we used to say about limousine liberals? Yeah. Well, we've got Cadillac conservatives or something. You've told me this.
I've told you this phrase before, the conservative industrial complex. There's too many folks that it's just hit, wash, rinse, repeat. Get your direct mail going, and always be in permanent outrage without having a need to actually trying to accomplish something. But I think that's even getting shaken up right now. We could have done this whole program on when you start seeing these glimmers that are going to happen in this opportunity. Because one thing you mentioned, the Republican Party, it is teetering as an institution. And there's going to be it's either going to reinvent itself or it's going to be replaced, one of the two, both of which are positive outcomes in the long run for the country. Yeah. And even our friends on the Democratic side, they're going to be going through a little bit of a crisis too, because what are they supposed to do with this guy in the presidency right now that you don't want to run again? They're going to have their own crises to look at.
And AOC came out stronger.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So maybe it's time to buy popcorn and watch this one play out. Adam Brandon, thank you so much. You're a great guy.
I just started going, and do we get the bourbon out now, or is that later? Just leave it down there.
That and the drugs.
Thanks, Brett. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.